Hey, I'm Hardeep. I'm one of the co-founders of Elevated Signals. Yeah, we were just kind of excited. We were sitting here probably about like 2 months ago, just talking about trying to get a group of people together, mostly just kind of like starting to do more community events and, you know, having opportunities for people to connect because, you know, it's really important in the industry. One of the things that I kind of noticed is there's a lot of silos of information, and you know, it'd be very beneficial for people to just kind of come and collaborate.
So,
yeah, for sure. Okay, and you hear me at the back?
Kill the fan, Jared. Kill the.
Oh no! Don't kill the fan.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm out of here lunch anyway, so.
Yeah, the plants are going.
Yeah, exactly.
No, who said plants?
It's flowers. He's got flowers in there.
Yeah, just have to.
So, but one of the things that I guess like I was trying to think like what value can I add to the conversation in the community, and that for me was really around kind of I guess like my background. Most of it has been software. Had some early exposure to manufacturing through aerospace as well. So, kind of taking some of that and bringing in the cannabis space, some of those principles, really thinking about the state of the industry, kind of where we're at, where we've come from, and where we need to go. So it's called The State of the Industry, Pathway to Success. Go for it. So yeah, that's me. So you can see I started developing some thick skin in 2016. That's when I got into the industry. It was myself, 2 other co-founders, Amar and Ben. We got into the industry for different reasons. For Ben and myself, it was around food security. We saw cannabis as a vehicle towards food security, really around like controlled environment agriculture. That's what a lot of cannabis was. And then for Amar, he was doing a master's in water engineering, so you know efficiency around like water usage. So we were very data-driven, analytical, and that's kind of like what we wanted to bring to this industry. But one of the things that we noticed, so I don't know if you're familiar with this graph here. This is Gartner. This is called a hype cycle graph. For any new emerging industry, this is kind of the trend that you'll usually go through. I've experienced this quite a bit throughout my career, you know, just being in the technology sector because lots of different technologies get brought to life. Not all of them are successful, some of them crash. You know, we kind of seen it happen in the cannabis space as well. So usually there's some kind of innovation, you know, you can kind of see this is, if you're trying to like map this out in terms of a timeline, I'd say this is probably like 2016, 2017. We had lots of investment coming into the cannabis space. Kind of around here, 2019, just around COVID, just before COVID, we really saw investment kind of like drop off in this space. And then that was like the trough of disillusionment, right? So this is where, you know, a lot of investors started kind of like inquiring in terms of, you know, why aren't we seeing our returns? What's the health of this, right? There's like saturation in the market of producers, yada, 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 right? And so usually this is where, you know, a lot of organizations will start looking at operational efficiency. So this is where you'll see people trying to figure out like cost of goods sold, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting because if you take this if you take the Canadian model and you look at and you apply this to the US, you can kind of see different variations of this happening. So on the East Coast, you'll see a lot of investment happening right now in terms of retail expansion as well as, you know, just expansion. We call it like land grab, essentially, right? Trying to build out as much as you can, trying to get as much market domination as you can, that kind of thing. But usually this is where a lot of those organizations will really struggle, right? It's when things kind of hit the ground, you know, and then after that, it's usually a slow kind of climb back up to having a sustainable market, right? So go to the next slide. Where are we? Like, where are we? So,
best presentation.
Yeah. So this is where we're at. Like, if you think about it realistically for Canada, you can see a lot of organizations are starting to get towards a notion of understanding what profitability will look like for them. They're spending more time, more resources, and trying to understand cost of goods sold. Just like it's really become supply chain management at the end of the day. Whether it's aerospace, automotive, cannabis, all that kind of stuff, it really is manufacturing. So, thank you. And it's not even our final form yet, So where we want to get to, next slide, is up here, right? We want we want to get to here.
I think it's even better.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to get to a productive, a productive industry, right? So we want to get to a place that's healthy, where people are actually making revenue, profits, and so that's, if you go to the next slide, it really is about, okay, what do we need? We need profitability, right? It's like profits everywhere. That's kind of what we need to get to. But, next slide. If you think about what you need to do for any kind of manufacturing, at the end of the day, you're manufacturing a product, right? And part of manufacturing a product is you have to really understand supply chains. And you have to understand that your own, facility is a supply chain, right? So the way we're tracking information in terms of, if you think about like an ERP coming into the space, concepts that they'll have is like bill of materials, right? And that comes into what are all of the inputs that go into producing something, right? And these are traditional manufacturing principles that you'll see in manufacturing industries. And this is something that, we're now starting to see cannabis producers start thinking about bill of materials, cost of goods sold, right? It's like they're, stock levels, different thresholds for when they need to do stock reorders, like all those kinds of things. And trying to become a lot more systematic about it, because obviously through this whole COVID experience, supply chains have been a mess, right? And so there's been a lot of challenges in terms of getting things in on time, and that's led to a lot of disruptions. So next slide, please. So if you think about it, this is really how people manage their supply chains today, right? It's a lot of pen, a lot of paper, spreadsheets. You have different departments relying on kind of different spreadsheets for inventory. And so there's usually, like, when we go and talk to someone, there's a lot of miscommunication between teams in terms of like inventory on hand and what you actually have, and those are challenges that, on a surface level, it's like, okay, we don't have a great understanding of like what inventory is, like, well, then what are all the knock-on effects of that? Well, it's like, okay, now my purchasing of materials kind of gets delayed. Well, that means now if I'm not purchasing and receiving things on time, that means that next batch that I have that needed the supplies or whatever is now all of a sudden delayed, right? And what does that affect? Well, now I can't get that product to market as quickly. And what does that impact? Well, it's like, if I'm an early organization, then I want to get to profitability as quickly as possible, because I just put in a lot of investment in terms of just getting my license and getting to a point where I can actually produce product, right? And if you're a mature organization, well, now that means I'm having challenges, staying competitive in the market, right? So, next slide. So for me, it hurts me to kind of see going into organizations, just, people spending millions and millions of dollars on, these facilities, and, it is an industry that, competition is kind of like heating up. So as a result of that, when I see pen and paper, I just see a lot of inefficiency. And that for me means really it's like lost revenue opportunity. So that's where in a struggling industry, like, I love this industry, I want to see it succeed. It's like, from that perspective, that's why I say my soul, it hurts, So next slide. So I was like, what if I told you there's a better way, right? It's like, thank you. So I personally, whenever I'm building anything, whenever I'm trying to learn anything, I always try to go and look at best practices, who does something extremely well, and I try to learn from that. I try to replicate it, right? And so this is Toyota, If you haven't read this book, it's a phenomenal book. Really highly recommend reading it. But Toyota has a principle called lean, and lean, next slide, is all about reducing waste, right? You're trying to minimize waste as much as possible. Yeah, exactly.
There's a better picture of it.
Yeah. So, but if you think about it, waste is not just like inventory. It's about processes. It's about time. Any kind of thing that you're doing within a operation, you can track it in terms of efficiency, right? And anything that is not optimally efficient, there's some waste to it, and there's an opportunity to basically improve processes, right? So Toyota, being Toyota, in that book, they do a lot of kind of just like case studies in terms of like what they've done, how they've set up, organizational structures and everything like that. And it's all been for reducing the amount of waste. And so you never achieve this, right? You never get zero waste within a process, but you try to get to that state, right? So, yes, thank you. So for me, when I look at most organizations, one of the most, I guess, like fundamental aspects that I think about in terms of reducing waste is on the inventory side, right? So the amount of material that gets wasted in terms of inefficiencies within maybe like a cloning process, flowering process, right? Packaging, extraction, anything like that, where the systems that you have are creating essentially processing loss within this supply chain, right? So that's kind of, for me, very first principles, because once you have inventory really understood, and that's like cannabis, non-cannabis, everything, right? Once you kind of have that understood, then you kind of start layering on top of that other aspects of measuring waste. Okay, let's actually look at our labor force and understand, wasted movements. I was at in Jackson, and there's this organization that's setting up like a controlled environment agriculture out in Maine, and so they showed me their floor plan, and the first thing that I started looking at the floor plan was like, well, how do people move around this? Like, how's that product move, right? And it was like, well, I was like, okay, you start way over here, but then you're going to get way over here. I didn't say anything, but I was just like, that's a lot of movement. This is not a small facility, right? So there's going to be people going back and forth trying to get products. So it's like things like that, right? Next slide. So this gentleman over here is quite experienced in this stuff as well, but Six Sigma, this is, I don't know if you can read this, but there's processes that you can implement within organizations to help them understand inefficiencies and understand how to kind of reduce the amount of waste within their processes. But really it comes down to defining a process and a problem. So you have a problem, you're going to measure it. So measure your current state, measure that performance, analyze it. Determine and implement like improvement to that process, and then maintain it, right? There's a lot of people who will go in, they'll look at a process, do an assessment, implement it, but then never maintain it, right? And you just end up going to the status quo that you had previously. So there's a lot of gold from Toyota and a lot of these other manufacturing industries, and one of the things I think that we would like to contribute to the community over time is bringing more of this mentality into the cannabis space, because I think it would be very valuable. Right? So, next slide, please. So, another thing is, in order to like really implement any of this, it's all about people, processes, and technology. Really, you need the people to drive the processes, and eventually, once you understand the processes, you bring in technology to solve those problems, right? We have technology. So those people, processes, and technology are really about defining centers of excellence within your organization. And so these are, and this doesn't necessarily always have to be internal, it can be external as well. So I always think about like consultants coming into the space, helping organizations kind of understand processes, improvements, all that kind of stuff. And you know, I see this as kind of like an emerging trend that will become more and more important in this industry, is helping organizations really fine tune their businesses. So hopefully you understand this reference. Another one that I'd love to share is Kaizen. So this also comes from Toyota. It's used quite extensively in manufacturing, but all it is it's all about continuous improvement and incremental continuous improvement. So we do this quite a bit within our own organization, even for like small things. Like after we, one of the most recent ones was we did lift, and then it was a cannabis, and after lift we were like tearing down our booth, and it was like, okay, how can we make this more efficient next time, right? I was like, okay, we're going to bring in like a little kit that has like some straps and some tools and things like that, and so the next time when we're tearing down our booth, it'll be a little bit faster, it'll be a little bit smoother. And so Kaizen, you know, this is something that I think is very valuable, and you know, people are doing it, but it's always nice to attribute like an actual word to what that is, right? So, yeah. And like this is just an example, right? Like Rubicon's an awesome company. They're got some really smart people there. You know, we're just a technology product. We just enable, right? But it really comes down to people driving these things within their business, and they ended up saving a ton of money. And ultimately, if you go to the next slide, like what does that mean? It's like you create operating capital for the business, right? And in today's environment, operating capital is super important, right? We've all seen the latest, you know, like articles around people and excise taxes, not paying excise taxes because, and I've heard this from producers, because you know, you don't get like absolutely killed for not paying excise, so it's like, well, I'm going to keep that money for just operating expenses, right? I'll pay it later when they ask me, but for now, I'm just going to use it. Excise. So yeah, really, at the end of the day, it's for supply chains, for profitability, for thinking about where we are, where we want to get to. It's really about reducing waste. Next one. So I guess like, you know, in a community setting, like the call to action that I have is, let's help make companies profitable, right? Let's really focus on helping these organizations get to productive state. And so this is where, you know, we're a technology provider. There's lots of other people out there, lots of you here, that can really contribute. And this is kind of why we wanted to kind of get together. It was just to start conversations around how do we actually get the industry to a state of productivity. Yeah, cool, that's it.